our next objective is going to be looking at patterning to understand the logic of systems on a more abstract level. So we're going to kind of go back to the grid. We're going to be mapping some geometry. But now we have an opportunity to actually modify the geometry in more dynamic ways. Okay, so you've learned a little bit about panels and overriding information, typing in data in different ways, and now we're going to use that to transform geometry. So to get started, we're going to add in a square grid. And that square grid, you now know you can change the number of cells, you can change the size of the cells. It doesn't really matter to me what you choose, but I'm going to say something like 0 is less than 5 is less than 10. 10 is probably a good number to be working with. Well, yeah, I'm sure it'll be all right. I'll just bump it up to 10.
The square grid, you just typed in SQ
I
and then grid?
I tend to use, believe it or not, Grasshopper is a software where I tend to use the panels a lot, the menus. I don't typically type anything in. So I just go up to grid, type in square, or click square. But I'm sure if you just typed in SQ, there it is, square grid. So what we have here, guys, we have points and cells. So these points are coming out in packages, right? 11 by 11, because I have 10 subdivisions. And we're going to use this information to create a dynamic pattern. And this pattern is going to be something that we're going to map geometry onto. And I'm going to start with circles. In fact, I think I can use the grid. I might have to switch to a subdivide surface. We'll see. So I go to curve, and I go to primitive, and I drop in a circle. And here I'm going to set the plane, origin, for each of my circles to be the points of the grid. So let me turn this off so we can kind of really clearly see what we're working with. I'm going to make the top view really, really big. Here is what's going down, everybody. We are going to override information that's being fed into this array of circles. So let's take a look at this real quick. We have the radius of a circle. It is requesting one value. It does not only take or accept just one value. So if I was to go to params and drop in this panel, right? This panel I said is pretty diverse. I can double click it and I can put in numerical values to override what the size of those circles are going to be. So I can make one that's 1 and then hit enter, and I can say 1.5, enter, 0.25, enter, and 2, 1.25. Then click outside. So when you hover over it, see how it's actually coming through as a list of information? I wonder if I have to turn off multi-line data. I tend to forget that kind of thing. So I'm going to plug it in and see what it does. I think I had to turn off multi-line data. Yeah. So, sorry. When you're working with a panel, if you want it to read, I was explaining this earlier. Basically, if you have the number 1, I'm going to copy this. And you guys can stop working for a second. You don't need to follow along with this. I just want to show you something. But when you have the number 1, and it's set to multi-line data, the number 1 comes through as a number. If I change that to 2, oops, sorry, then it changes the number, the numerical input. But the thing you need to be aware of is that these panels have syntax rules, which basically means it's like the language of code, the grammar of code. And so if I did something like hit enter, it changes the meaning of what I've typed in. It's no longer just a number. It becomes text. So that's just something to be aware of, because now if I click off, it's going to give me an error, and it's going to say data conversion failed from text to number. So something we can do here is, and I'm going to add all my numbers back in again. If we want it to read as a list, we turn off this toggle, and I right-clicked it, and you turn off this toggle called multi-line data, and it reads it as a list. So I'd like you to do that right now. Is type in a list of numbers ranging from, more than 0 to 2. And I'll come around and double check before we move on. Now that you're all here, what I'm going to show you is, the way that you're processing the information can change. And it changes based off of how the point list is read. So I know I showed you that it kind of changes the direction when we did it before and we put the point list on. Everything on the first row read 0. Everything on the second row was 1 and 2 and 3. And that's what you've got here, right? So 0 is 1 and 2, or 0, and then 1 and then 2, and then 3, and 4. I had 1.25, so 0, 1, 2, 3. That one should be bigger, right?
Maybe. That's the default.
Why isn't that one bigger? That's weird. 2? Oh, okay, that's right. Because the last, all right, so I forgot about that. So when you're dealing with a list, right? A list has a limit. When you hit the last value of your list, that number continues on. So if the size of my boundary is 10, and I've only given it 4 numbers, the last number is the one that carries through. So those ones going up, I thought that they were the size of 1, but they're actually the size of 1.25. So when we change the way that this number is being read, if I go to my P list, right, the input values of each of the points, and I flatten it, now you can see that that information is reading kind of different, right? It's going back to what we saw before in the point list, and it's giving us index value 0 down here, and then 1 and 2 and 3, and then 4 everywhere else. So the challenge here is I only want 4 numbers, but I want it to repeat throughout the entire pattern. So what you have to do for that is you go up to Set, and you go under Sequence, and this is where you're going to deal with sets of data in terms of kind of enveloping them in logic and sequencing. This is kind of the main area for that. So what we're looking for is this one that's called repeat data. And it says it'll repeat a pattern until it reaches a certain length. So you can imagine that at that point, if I drop it in, it's going to ask for the data to repeat, but then it's also going to ask you to define what the length is. And that's right there. Now all the stuff that I showed... You're making me cough too. Now all the stuff that I showed you in the earlier segments are starting to recur. Right? Now you're starting to get more experience. You're seeing the same things more often. So you could probably tell me, how do I get that value?
Use a
It's under set and list. There you go, list length, right? Yeah, so same thing. We just saw that about an hour ago. List length is going to ask you for a list. And all it's going to give you is a numerical output that tells you how many items are in that list. So you pull the circle list in, it reads how many there are, 121, and then it tells you 121. So I'm going to feed that into repeat data, and then I'm going to feed the list into, oh, I'm sorry, circles. Sorry, I think this is going to go before 121 points. Yeah. I failed you. Here we go. I put it in the wrong spot. We are going to fit it in between. So we have 121 points. We're going to read how many of those points there are. And then we're going to repeat the circles. No. Wait. What am I doing here? Data. Repeat circles. List length, repeat. Oh. Sorry, I am thinking about something totally different. We are going to repeat the data into the panel. My apologies. We're going to redo this panel. So we're going to go to set list length. We're going to measure the number of points. Then we're going to repeat data, and we're going to take the data of the panel. And we're going to put the list length into that, and what it's going to give us is the full length. That's weird. There we go. All right, so I swapped a few things out on you guys there, but basically what I wanted flattened was the output of the P, which gave me my 121 values. It gave me 121 points that those circles are being mapped to, and I repeated the data of those circles, and now when I plug that into the radius, that's what you're going to get. Sorry, guys. I totally just got confused there. Yes?
So those two commands, you're just trying to reorganize the lists of data so that you can eventually organize the circles in that way?
A better way of stating it would be that I'm not reorganizing the list of data or organizing the list of data. I'm expanding upon it. I'm having it cycle through that list that I've given it until it reaches the same number of points that it's trying to map.
And you feed that into the grid, so the grid knows to place your shapes or geometries on those.
Yeah, so what I gave it is this panel, and it has my 5 numbers, and then I repeated those numbers a certain number of times, 121, and then I fed that new repeat list of numbers into this. So now I've got 121 of those original 5 values. You look like you're stressing out up there. Okay, so what I really want to show you, though, how are we doing? Oh, this is getting long. So what I really wanted to show you is that the real dynamic part of this pattern is really not so much in the fact that you're repeating data. That's not all that dynamic. But the parameters that you set changes the framework that your pattern is going to be displayed. So if I change, right now this looks like a pretty interesting pattern. For some of you, depending on the numbers or how big your spacing is, it's not going to look like this. In fact, if I change the size of my grid, it becomes far less interesting, in my opinion. Or if I pull it back down, then I can actually read the dynamic nature of this pattern. Another thing you can do is actually change the count of your sides. Right now, because of the direction, the X direction isn't really going to change anything. The Y direction, on the other hand, because it changes the count vertically, will change drastically the nature of this pattern, because it's realigning based on its striation across.
A parameter where they always have a certain distance in between each other, regardless of however, in other words, they push each other apart. Maybe that's another discussion.
Yeah, you can. It's going to be
sort of like collision detection, it's
Mhm.
like, no matter what size I make A, B will always be this X difference, distance.
yeah, you absolutely can. It's just going to be constructed in a different way. You'll have to do a lot of curve analysis to figure out where it is, what its radius is, and then test it against every single other one. That's all. So anyway, yeah, as I move this around, then my pattern is going to change along with it. And you can see that each one of these is drastically different. Okay, so what questions do you have? That one's less scary than the last one. Okay, see, it's not all craziness. Some of it's just like really fun and simple.